Yeah, what was it? There was one point where he trapped himself. Daryll Cooper did. Joe kind of started to call him out. He's like, what was it? What was it? He was like, okay, so you're saying this about, at what point did Hitler start making these moves against the Jewish people, as though he was trying to talk about and Cooper he doesn't really answer it, and he starts to try, and he didn't want to admit that it was way sooner than people think. He kind of blurs that line. It's like he was making moves way before war had really broken out. Like the Lebensborn program, what was that, 38, 37, I believe, was the beginning of the Lebensborn program, where they were kidnapping children, Dutch children, to breed, human breeding, to create their next generation. So anyways.
It's also, what about the 3 million Poles too?
Right.
That they killed along the way. You know, this isn't, they make it all about one issue, and now the internet's pushing every single thing on the Jews and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, when people do shit wrong, call it out. I'm going to sit here and say, hold two thoughts at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The current Israeli government is very bad. I do not fuck with Smotrich. I do not fuck with Ben Gvir, who I believe is out now, but was in that government for a while. I do not fuck with Netanyahu. I think what they're doing in Gaza is completely wrong. And I also think that as a party that, there's a lot of parties in Israel that want a minority part of the vote. They do not represent all the people of Israel. I, for one, would not want people around the world, and I know they did, and I understand this, conflating me with George Bush and Dick Cheney when we started all those wars, right? So I try to pay the same respect to the people. I can say all that, and I can say that Mossad is extremely good at what they do, and they do some very dirty shit, including Jeffrey Epstein, which I believe was their operation. And at the same token, I can also say that World War II was very bad. The Holocaust was very bad. It did happen. There's all kinds of evidence for you people out there, for people who are now trying to relitigate something like this. And a guy like Hitler who, yeah, he hated the Jews a lot. He also hated a lot of other people and hated things that in his mind weren't pure. All of that was bad. And the fact that you either have to be all here or all here on an issue as historically separate, by the way, as something like that is, where we're just in this case now focusing on one race being the Jewish people, is fucking crazy. And it does make me wonder how many people out there who are saying these things are friends with any Jewish people or something. My one friend Noah I'm from New Jersey. Obviously, my friends are Italian, Irish, Greek, and Jewish. That's what it is. And, Hispanic. But, my one friend Noah used to say, where's my check? I'm like, what check? He's like, the check. I'm supposed to get a check from the cabal. That's what everyone tells me. It comes in the mail once a month. It pays me off. And obviously the joke is that you think there's this big thing with everyone, but now you're just falling trapped to the same thing we've fallen into the trap of over time, which is that you start to pick bad people and then conflate an entire race with said bad people. I got news for you, man. Every race has bad people and they do bad things. Go look at the fucking, what's it called? What's Klaus Schwab's thing? World Economic Forum. There's every race represented on that thing. I can tell you a lot of those people aren't too good. But people don't want to talk about that. Why are we why do we go back to this pattern where we have to pick the one boogeyman and people are it's everything them?
Because we make sense of the world through narrative. It makes it easier. That complexity. It's almost like our minds. No, I agree. I think what you're saying is perfectly reasonable and is a good way of approaching this. But to answer, I think that is why. It's just it's a way to simplify the vast complexity.
You bring up the one tweet, and I do try to be careful when people are just posting screenshots of some tweets because things can be taken out of context. The one you bring up, I don't think is he said what he said there. Whether or not talking about Daryll Cooper, talking about the picture of Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower in 1940 versus the Olympics pre-ceremony. It could have been kind of a joke. I'll give him that. I don't know. But yeah, I did a live on YouTube back when that happened. The Olympics pre-ceremony, that was cringy as fuck. And you call it out. But it's an anecdotal thing. Right? And it's not to say that that's not representative of a bigger pattern that people are like, okay, maybe we should get something like this in line. But like, society will move in pendulums and start to get in line. You've seen that in some of the elections since then already. Whereas when you're talking about a nation that had significant GDP and minus their crazy eugenics science, some very high-level engineering and scientific endeavors as Nazi Germany did, with a psychopath who wanted to take all the land, Lebensraum, his word, not mine, you know, I don't know how you can look at that and say, you know, maybe that would have been better. You think someone like that wants to stop there? Like, people talk about Putin. Oh, where will he stop? Putin has the GDP of Italy in Russia. All due respect. He don't have 17, 18 trillion dollars of GDP. So it's limited. Hitler had a high GDP. He rebuilt a lot of that economy. It was a threat. And sometimes I feel like people can't,
But
you know.
Russia has more weaponry than the Nazis ever had.
That's true. That's true. So you're saying that, so if people are concerned about like Putin as a Hitler, they have a reason to do that, not necessarily because of his economy.
I'm not trying to compare Putin. I think that would be a mistake. I think that's one of the mistakes that's being made. Is because people looking at, I think Churchill made the right move. That was the right move to stand your ground and not negotiate or try for a ceasefire, which they honestly had tried a ceasefire with Hitler. But he had already taken over all of Europe except England at that point, or the UK. He was bent on as much domination. I don't think we can compare that. It's just not quite accurate to compare the two. But my point there is just, so I think when Trump is sitting there with Zelensky, that should be we are trusting him to make that his number one priority, is avoiding nuclear conflict, because it would be the end for us and them. And that's my only, I don't have much of I did one video on that, and it's really that was the only point I was trying to make. I don't think it was that nuanced. It's just like, that's the framework in which that's the first principle to examine this through. I just forgot what I was going to say, but
I do that too.
Oh, and if you have the chance to do a ceasefire, try it. I understand people are saying, well, there's like a huge chance he'll break the ceasefire, but okay, we'll cross that bridge when we get there then. If you can stop the bullets, let's stop them. And I understand the argument that that'll just allow them to become stronger. In the meantime, they'll rearm, and so
it's not a black and white solution for something like that.
It never is.
For sure, it never is. And people want that because you know they'll either say, they'll get pissed, righteously so, in some ways, that we've given fucking $500 billion to Ukraine, and so they decide that the issue is completely null and void, or they'll be like, throw a Ukraine flag in their bio and say, fund them into perpetuity. Yeah,
and what's interesting is when I see comments just on what I just articulated there, like I was saying, that was the point of that video. I see Warren is a Russian or a Putin sympathizer now and everything. It's like, really, how do you deduce that from just that? And that's also, it's just the critics, I would say, that there's some people that really don't like me and what I'm doing. And I guess it's because they think I'm like, Destiny wants to debate in the conditions of debating me. He's like, I don't want to talk about philosophy or anything esoteric. Like, I don't like all that mumbo jumbo. I'll debate you on anything to do with Trump's policy. I'm like, man, that doesn't interest me. I'm not an expert on, it's not what but
you're more interested in
how people think rather than the information, which is what people think. And Destiny is an information guy. That's what he does for hours every day, and he's good at it. But he's going to out-information me on whatever it is. And for the same reason, he doesn't want to get into the philosophical or the esoteric or how, just mentioning his video when he made the video, it was so funny because I forget which one it was talking. Oh, it was Neil deGrasse Tyson on with Shapiro, and he's talking about you can't observe an objective fact. It depends on how you want to use that fact. And Shapiro's pointing out why is it not enough to just be able to make an observation about an objective fact? And Destiny lost his mind on it. I started talking about the difference between a social construct and an objective fact. He's like, this suit, he's using every like keyword for a suit, a pseudo-intellectual. It made for some funny content out of that. But so we're just different, interested in different things.
But he wants to try to pull you into his.
Well, I messaged him after. I was like, hey man, I'd be happy to chat because I think he had some good points. He was analyzing, it was during his regular show. He was covering, I forget which one. Oh, Tim Pool versus that new guy. I forget his name. He's like this younger guy. And they were talking about
Smith, Tim Pool, and
we were talking about like the January 6th thing. And I think I made some mistakes because I was just analyzing the moves, the plays that are occurring on the field of that game. And I think I made some mistakes on it. Like there was some information that maybe Tim wasn't as right as he was pretending. And so he made some good points around that. And then he launched into that other video. And that's where I was like, fair enough on that other one, but there's some points I think I can clarify on the Shapiro versus Neil deGrasse Tyson, because that's the entire point of that video, is how the objective reality is under attack, and that's important. But
yeah, so your channel's so bingeable. For people out there who haven't seen it, we're gonna have Warren's link down in the description. All the videos are like 7 to 10 minutes, and you put them. I can tell you come from like a filmmaker, like director background, because you put them together so perfectly with like a clear
thank you.
Resolution and analysis of the conflict and all that. But the Neil deGrasse Tyson one you're talking about with Ben Shapiro, it's like when I hear stuff like that, like I've heard Neil's science takes over the years. I don't necessarily agree with some of the stuff he says on, for example, not being open to there being, or seemingly not being open to the idea of life beyond here or what it might do to interact with us. But the guy's so smart, and he spent his life building, as to use his words, trying to find objective fact or whatever. And yet it's almost like he can't hear his own words, what he's saying with Ben Shapiro, because he's arguing, right? He's arguing.
When it gets to that, it's like Jon Stewart. We're talking about that. It's like when you get, they can have a great reputation. You're like, oh, I drive with everything they're saying, but they get to that one thing that doesn't fit within the larger story, and then you're just like, how can we? So that's the point that interests me, that space where that occurs. So.
Can we actually play a little bit of this one right here? We have it up. The Tim Pool. It's called Tim Pool Destroys the Left's New Star Whiz Kid, Luke Beasley. This is the one you were talking about, right?
Yeah, this is the one that Destiny was. I've gotten some criticism on this one.
Okay, let's hear this.
Are you going to make the fentanyl case?
I'm not going to make it. I'm going to ask you what you think happened.
You're the one who brought it up. I was just curious what your belief was about it.
Yeah.
I think that someone kneeled. I think
he brought it up, and so he asked you about it, and then you asked him back. And I'm just curious about what your opinion is on it. I think you don't have one. I think you don't know what to say.
When trapped, he tries to act as though he's maintaining the frame with sarcasm.
If you can't define what
any data that stop it. If I
stop what define it. Stop define right wing.
If I took the time to properly write out a definition.
The same technique David Pakman uses. This guy has spent a lot of time with David Pakman. Some people call him a David Pakman clone because he's using the same techniques, but they are weak techniques and they just dissolve.
I'm only going to speak on things I'm very informed on, so I'm not going to tell you exactly to the month that they should get.
If you don't have a thought on how long they should be in prison, it's fine to say.
This is what you do a lot, though?
It's fine to say, like, we don't know how the
your argument fails, you're just going to ask hyper-specific, slightly irrelevant questions to me.
How is it irrelevant?
And Luke Beasley just continues to play stupid. It's this dismissal of evidence that is so alarming, and which is why I think this debate resonated with so many people.
How is it irrelevant?
Because I don't think it's relevant for me to figure out, because I didn't sit in these courtrooms and listen to the details of every case, exactly how long each one should
How could you advocate for someone to be in jail if you don't know?
Well, I can tell you. Because Trump is saying we should subvert that process because he thinks what they did was patriotic and should then pardon them.
Trump is not conducting these pardons because he feels that what occurred on that day was good. I think it's that he feels that it was unfair. That's a big difference.
Or I think 3 years is long enough.
Yeah, and that's a wrong stance, but okay.
How is it wrong?
I just explained it to you.
No.
You didn't. You said the court process should play out the way it is.
You could literally count in this exchange how many times Luke Beasley says, I just explained it to you, therefore I don't need to articulate it again. It's like,
Right.
Tim Pool does a good job of not letting him get away with that. He says, no, you didn't. Explain it to me.
My opinion on the amount of time should be served for a crime is not just wrong because you like courts.
No, I get
You
that.
need to explain
I'm saying
why the time frame I'm asserting should be longer than 3 years.
No, I'm saying the default, you have to have overwhelming, compelling evidence that someone has been wronged to justify a president stepping in and saying, I'm subverting the justice system outcome.
Pardoning Hunter Biden disproves that argument right there.
Dear Sunday.com.
I don't know. Yeah, looking at it now, I don't remember what everyone was so up in arms about. But for me, it was first thing is interesting. It's like how you're maintaining the frame, which is just a technique. It's not so much like the information.
Maintaining the frame?
Yeah, so the confidence level. David Pakman does this a lot, and I was noticing both. So this is the nonverbal communication, the patterns that
Yes.
we pick up on, and I see David Pakman doing that. I had just done a video about David Pakman, so I was noticing that, and he uses some of the same phrases. I can't remember what it was, but we talk about it in the video. But if Tim Pool seems to be coming from that blank slate position we were kind of talking about, where it's like, okay, you're the one making the assertion that they deserve this, so therefore you're the one who's compelled to have the evidence. Right? So if I'm accusing someone, I have to provide the evidence.
Yeah.
He's simply saying, okay, you need to present your justification for why they do deserve this sentence. And I think the criticism's coming around, maybe it was something that wasn't in that cut, or it's something to do with a specific case that Tim was defending with one of those people. But looking at that portion of it seems to be around what is the right number of years to be for a nonviolent crime. Like maybe, because I'm just looking at, like, without outside information, just looking at that game, the moves that are occurring, and trying to analyze those moves. Like you're a commentator watching a sports game. Kind of.
Yeah.
That's the approach I started taking with it. But the video that my favorite video, the one that interests me the most, was when Joe Rogan had on the postmodern professor.
Oh, dude, the Thaddeus guy.
Thaddeus Russell. I did 2 videos on him.
All right, let's pull that up because first of all, it's a great video. I saw that one. Secondly, I remember listening to that podcast when it came out, and that whole segment when that went off the rails, I just kept going back and listening to, like, the guy's tone, and I'm hearing, like, how he arrived at these conclusions, and I'm like, this is not supposed to be a dumb guy. Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge help. Thank you.
No, he's a professor. And
Right.
He's debated on stage, but this is a perfect example of the group of people that claim there's no such thing as the fabric of reality. So how can you even live in accordance with it? It's all malleable. And he's going to make that argument.
It's crazy. Alessi, let's hit that play.
And you hear him take that a step further.
None of these things are biologically determined, that there is no natural essence to anything.
Fabric of reality.
Just think about those words, the claim that there is no natural essence, no natural reality.
Which means that we now are free to choose our own
The
destiny.
benefit of it.
And see why this is motivating, why this is their goal, because it is liberating for so much more ideology to follow, which we will see in a moment.
Prior to the 1960s and 70s, it was the dominant belief that if you were born a woman, you were going to be a wife and a mother.
He's bringing in examples of, like, the role of a woman in a household, which is going to be a cultural idea, which can evolve. But he's tying that in quickly with the sleight of hand into biological reality.
And we saw, first of all, that all these categories have changed over time, which tells us that they're just inventions. They're just inventions that get reinvented all the time. Okay?
He's so serious.
And second of all, they have served the
This is the
purposes
greatest
of
breakthrough of the 21st
ruling
century.
elites because they get to put people in their boxes and control them more easily.
And there's the point of how these are just tools for power, tools of the tyrants.
Those people over there, those are black. Therefore, they should be our slaves. So it's okay for us to have them as slaves. Those women over there, we don't want them, working for NASA. So we will have a rule against women working for NASA.
Yes, but women working for NASA has nothing to do with biology. So that's a false parallel. He's just slyly slipping in there.
So postmodernists said, None of this is biological. None of this is inevitable. You are now free to do what you want as an individual. It was a liberating moment. It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia.
What he just said there is very important. This has become the dominant way of thinking in academia. He's openly acknowledging that.
I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics.
If you only list
Joe's
your
reaction to
vacation-
that is priceless. He's like, "That's it." I don't.
Like, keep this going.
That's it.
That's it.
This guy really does have a bone to pick with Jordan Peterson. He did call out
Oh, he
Jordan
hates
Peterson in our
Peterson.
last
Yeah.
video. He calls out Jordan Peterson in this appearance on Joe Rogan.
So, and this is my second disagreement with Jordan Peterson. He thinks that all the stuff in college campuses that's crazy is because of postmodernism.
This is a big deal. And you heard him earlier articulate that this has become the predominant way of thinking in academia. So this is important.
It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia. It is the supreme achievement of academics.
It's kind of ironic. This is actually impeding
for Joe to
the
come
places women have access to.
Women are allowed very much so into places they weren't allowed before.
A woman in a changing room with a 5-year-old daughter no longer has privacy from male genitalia, which, according to this guy, there's no such thing. He's literally going to make that argument.
The trans movement needed postmodernism to make that intervention and say, no, that's not true, right? You can actually be a woman because woman is an invention. It's a social construct.
We're talking about no one is born a man? You're not born a man? I'm not born a man?
I'm saying that, no,
I think we're getting silly.
Hold on here. I think it's the category of man becomes meaningless.
Does it?
Yeah, we just did this, man.
But it's not
Before
an
you think I'm-
invention.
Yeah, no, it is, of
But
course.
it's not an invention. One of them has a penis and testicles.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a male.
The thing we see, we call it a penis.
All right, so here's where we start to move into the wacky territory and actually attack the fabric of reality and biology.
What much of the trans movement now is doing, which makes me so sad, is that they're saying that I am biologically, essentially, naturally, in my core, a woman.
Oh, no.
No one is. No one is.
Because there is no such thing, according to his logic, as a biological woman.
A lot of the trans movement now is doing, there's a good word, reifying. They're making these ideas, these abstractions real again. They're making these claims that are similar to Sam Harris's claims and to old racist claims and to old
I've had
sexist
so many
claims.
professors like
Right
this.
there, he's equating biology with racism and sexism.
Right? Because you've heard a lot of trans people say this, right? I was born a woman. That's what they often say. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is, no one was born anything.
What? You're losing me in a huge way.
Why?
You don't
And this is where it goes off the rails.
think you're born a man?
No.
What are you born? Why are you a man?
For all sorts of reasons.
For all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
None of them being
Well, we
biological.
just decided.
None of them being the XY chromosome.
We
None
just-
of them being you have testicles.
But
None
we
of them
went-
being you have a penis.
He's conflating how we use categories of language, which are tools made by human beings to be able to communicate, and he's conflating that with biological categories. That's why I think Joe Rogan is getting disconnected, because that's a leap.
Is there certain inventions, certain social constructs that do nothing but bad things?
This is a very common tactic. Because there are some categories that do bad things, therefore we cannot have any categories. That's similar to saying because there are some bad aspects to capitalism needs to be overturned.
That do no good, and they're only social constructs, like race and gender.
All right, let's cut it right
Why is it
there.
only debate?
What is that? Like what
It's
again,
postmodernism,
not
man.
it's postmodernism, but not a dumb guy like intellectually as it's supposed to be. Making an
almost
opinion that is
It's like too much time in the academy, too much education. They get caught up in it. It's not as that's gold right there. Just that not, but the segment with Rogan, I love that guy in general because it's kind of like if I were to just sit down and talk into the camera about this and describe what I've seen at colleges and things, people don't believe it. This gives us a chance to see the words coming out of his own mouth. And so you can't dismiss it. And that's why I enjoy the format. So when I say gold, it's like, that's why it's like, oh, there's it serves that purpose. It's because I have encountered so many professors like that studying even, okay, I'm a graduate student studying filmmaking, but I have had cultural media studies that are required at the college, and I still have
Cultural media studies?
yeah, and I have the textbook from it still, and on the front is a raised fist, and the first chapter 1 is Karl Marx, and then it goes through postmodernism. It's applying Marxism to you as a content creator, essentially, as a college student who's trying to make movies or whatever it is, you're making content, which is true. How Marxism can be applied to that, how the ruling class, it went from in Marxism claiming that the ruling class are the only ones, because they're not working all day on the factory lines, they have more time to think, therefore they dominate the intellectual landscape, to now applying that same logic to content creation, right? And Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. And so that seeps down to even filmmaking. So you are literally learning postmodernism as a graduate film student.
Where do you think that started?
They say that in France in the 60s with postmodernism, that's when I believe, in the 60s is when we started seeing it in America. But that's when
by the way, keep the mic like in front of you.
Yeah, the French intellectual movement, it was France in the 60s. And then we saw the cultural movement in the 60s. Just think about the counterculture culture, Vietnam War, for very good reasons. But the pendulum kind of went whoosh, and now that was my parents' generation. So that's why I think I grew up surrounded by everyone who, it's like conservatives were these nasty things in Vietnam. And I can see why they view the world through that lens, but they're not adapting to the new information as the story changes. They're locked into the old story. And that's blinding them to everything now with Elon Musk. And it's like, and that's where the disconnect occurs. So now I go home and I'm vilified by like my best friends. But they're starting to get better. But when I first went home, the first time, after like that viral video thing, and I started making content, like they were,
Warren, how could you?
That's literally, they were in tears, man. Like,
oh no.
Yeah, I felt bad, but at the same time, I'm happy. I'm like, anytime you want to talk about it, I will talk about it. I'm not going to evade. And I'm just very calm about it and rational. Like, you're met with emotion.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to talk about it anytime. And I'm trying to lay out the logic as simple as I can about, we'll call him John, but tomorrow, if I decide I'm a woman, I still have male genitalia. Can you acknowledge that? And it's like, but you can't say that, Warren. And it's like, you
can't say that.
That was what he said. You can't. Yeah. He was saying you can't say that they're not a real woman.
And
like,
why? Did you say why? Make him explain it.
Well, essentially, okay, John. But look at but that would allow me then tomorrow to have access to this space where there could be a 6-year-old and her mom. Is it fair to that mom? Does she have a right to decide if that 6-year-old sees my junk or not? And their only logical response, it's not a logical response, the only response is, but you're not allowed to say that, because they can't contend with it logically.
You're not allowed to say that.
Well, that's transphobic.
Exactly.
That's all J.K. Rowling is saying.
We're going to talk about J.K. Rowling. You had one conversation. It could have been longer than 5 minutes with one kid where you just annihilated him with how people run with groupthink. So I want to get to that. But staying on this point, how did we get to a point? Is it strictly, you think, because of academia and where it got with Marxism, which I do want to come back to in a minute, but how do we get to a point where the answer to a question is, when you say why, they just say, because you can't say that. And when you say, but why can't we? And they just say, because. How?
Well, let's walk. We started walking through it. So the 60s, pendulum shifts so drastically. That generation is now the professor class. Those are the approximate age. Okay. They're starting to age out. They're retiring now. So, but they dominated academia. And the number of diverging perspectives, conservative perspective, I don't know the exact number, but it's very small, 10%, something like that. We'll something approximate. Like that. So we can see now how the academy has been taken over by this type of thinking, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what is the impact of the academy, college, when we're telling kids that you have to go to college? to be able to succeed. So now, and there it's the only thing that you can't go, you can qualify for a loan really without any collateral, or like we'll give you the loan. You can never default on the loan. You can never claim bankruptcy. It's the only loan like that, I believe. So we have this cultural movement now where everyone is going into the pipeline. The pipeline's been corrupted. I would say it's not so much Marxism. Marxism morphed into postmodernism. And postmodernism has morphed into this larger story that we'll just call the left. And the problem with that thinking, though, is it just takes that little bit of question, that little bit of prodding to now be a bigot. And we saw this with J.K. Rowling. So imagine that playing out in a classroom. Hey guys, I'm going to make a documentary about Winston Churchill or make a narrative film on that. But you know he's racist, right? Here's another example. I wrote a movie. I was building the world of the Secret Scholars before there was a YouTube channel. Okay, this kid, he's a genius, and it's like, is he insane or is he really a genius? And he's trying to make a flying ship that's powered by lunar power. Okay, it's a movie. Okay. And he's going to try and make this flying ship, and it looks like a gypsy wagon, and it can fly. I pitched that. Crickets. Warren, you're not allowed to say gypsy. That's racist. And I'd never heard that before. And okay, but what'd you think about the story? Crickets. And so, yeah, that's what the experience is kind of like. That first day of like, okay, preferred pronouns, don't know what that is. And it's one thing after another. There's protests at Emerson College because they're claiming Emerson College is racist. One of the most left-leaning, brainwashed colleges out there. And no one can really provide any evidence because it's all, and I was talking about this with Joe Rogan, and I couldn't remember any specific examples. And I think the reason for that is because it's subconscious. Their argument is that it's microaggressions. It's critical race theory. You don't need evidence when it comes to critical race theory. You don't need evidence. No, it's microaggression. I'm so racist, I don't even know I'm racist. So I don't know that what I'm doing, I can't even identify that it's racist. So it just becomes a subjective interpretation on their part. If they feel like it's racist, therefore it's racist. So then they can use that as evidence. Next thing you know, there's 300 students parading in with placards to interrupt the faculty meeting. True story. Next day, I'm in a pedagogy course with the dean and the head of the social justice center. I left this part out of the story with you. I wish I had included that. There's a social justice center. Mm-hmm. The head of that office is sitting in there, and even the dean was like, this is bullshit. And he's the same generation as my parents and like same thinking and everything. Because I remember and in that meeting, 4-hour class, there was 3 white students. We were all told to shut up for the entire time, concede our space. We weren't allowed to talk.
Concede your space.
Right. Color of our skin, all that. I was like, this is weird. This seems like logically the opposite of treating people the same regardless of the color of their skin, but okay. Hadn't really started to wake up fully yet. Get in the elevator, going down with the dean. It's just me and him in the elevator. And he's like, I literally remember this. And he says under his breath, he's like, they were talking about decolonializing the canon, meaning the great works of literature that are being shared. And it's his responsibility to monitor the canon or to decide what the canon is and is it being taught or not. And so he's being told that he's racist unless he decolonializes the canon. He's in the elevator. He's like, this is bullshit, decolonializing the canon. But he wouldn't say anything out loud in that room because everyone was terrified. People's jobs were on the line. One professor spoke out, and he was the president of the college, wrote a letter, I still have it, to this one professor who was willing to say we shouldn't bow to mob rule. This isn't a good thing to do. That's essentially all it was.
That's all he said.
Essentially, but articulated
in a professorial way.
Right. The president of the college writes a letter I'm so disappointed, and sends it out to every single individual with an Emerson EDU email address.
Open letter. Yeah.
That's like mobbing him.
Yes.
Bullying him into silence. The one person who was willing to say something. True story.
That's fucking... Now, that professor, had you had classes with him? Did you know him at all?
No, I didn't know that professor.
So you didn't know him. So you don't know like what his viewpoint is. That is... The idea of groupthink and how it gets into things. I remember when I was in college taking a Management 101 class, they were teaching us a few different like, business terms or whatever. And they had like, efficiency, effectiveness, one other like very, normal one. And then it said groupthink. And I'd never seen this word before. I thought they had made up a word. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like they're making up a word here. It's some type of term. And they explained what it was, which is the idea that when, one idea is prevented, and I'm paraphrasing here, but in a large group, other parts of the group will go along with it to be agreeable or whatever, regardless of whether or not it actually has merit or makes sense or whatever. And I think about that moment all the time in my life because it's defined how I look at so many things, because I never realized that it's probably like the most important term in our modern like discourse that could possibly exist. And when you tell me a story like that, that is groupthink at its highest and worst form, because you have someone who and I don't know this because you didn't know the background of the professor, but let's say that at this school where most people seem to think one way, this professor was no exception, and he did as well, which means for however many years he's been there, whether it's 5 or 10 years, on every issue where it's like, oh, insert one coin here, I'm a part of the team, he's been a part of the team and has, in good faith in that way, proven himself to be a part of the team. The minute he says, wait a minute, maybe the intention, he's not even saying the intentions are bad. Mm-hmm. He didn't even, based on what you told me, he's not even saying they're bad. He's saying the outcome is. The outcome has downstream effects that we should think about, and they go whoop, off with his head. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah, there was a lack of evidence, and we are bowing to a mob of people that are making these claims without evidence, which is probably not a good thing to do. And we're supposed to be standing for the opposite. We're supposed to be shaping the young minds. And yeah, I should have talked about that. With you. I didn't. I gave like a half-baked version of that story, but it's just even crazier. Then afterwards, I was like, wait, there was so much more to that. And so I'm glad.
You never say everything you want to say. The part of that episode I listened to, I thought was awesome. So you're just being critical, but you're self-critical. But I was also, and I'm like surprised you haven't been on a ton of more podcasts as well, because like your videos are obviously great, but you're thinking about things and you're coming at it from a real, like I said earlier, like a logical lens, which is so welcome to the conversation.
There's only been a few people I've said, I was talking about like with you about this a little bit, and there's one more that shortly after I got fired, the Free Press said Bari Weiss wants to sit down with you in person, and I didn't know who that. I Googled it. Okay, cool. Free Press, like she's, they sent Michael Moynihan, who's a great guy, cool guy, and everything, and he sat right in front of that bookcase, and we did this whole thing. He hired a professional cinematographer, lights, decided it was too overlit. And I was like, man, I record down here every day. Like, you can light down here, just take down some of the lights. I didn't say that. I was like, you're in charge, whatever you want to do. He's like, let's move it to the driveway. So they move it out to my driveway, and we do it. And then there's a lawnmower going off, and we have to stop there's airplanes. We have to stop everything. Anyways, they ended up not even releasing it. And I don't know.
They didn't release it?
No. And I emailed Michael, like, are you still planning? Because this is interesting, because going into it, I was like, sure, I'm not going to mention the name of the school, though. I was like, as long as you don't mind that.
The school you worked at.
Right. That's my one thing. I'm not the name. I'll talk about it all you want. And they agreed to it. And then afterwards, we wrapped, and he said, I was like skeptical about whether this whole thing was real or not. But then enough people talked about it that I figured it's real. And I said, well, that's not logical. Just because a bunch of people talk about something doesn't mean it's real. And he was probably like, who the hell would say that? And I was just thinking logically, like how I do. And he might have taken that to be like, I'm pulling a scam or something. Because then a few days later, I was driving down here. The other one I did is actual sit down, the Comedy Cellar. I was driving down to do that the next day. And I get an email from him saying, hey, just for my journalistic integrity, I just need you to share the name with me off the record. And I was like, dude, I don't know you. I don't trust you. And me and him had even talked about how it's a common tactic, because Fox News were like, we want to write a piece about it, but we need the name of the school for legal. And I was like,
they need a mob.
And he's like, yeah, they often do that. And they wait till the last minute to pressure you, saying we won't run it otherwise. And then he does the exact same thing. And they never ran it. And I don't know if it's because of that, or maybe it's because my address was in the background, because they did it in the driveway. It might have doxed the house. Maybe it was the airplanes. I don't know, but they never released it. So
they never released it.
And then I made a video about Bari Weiss on Joe Rogan. She probably wasn't happy with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that one out. So, what'd you go at her about?
She did same thing, same pattern as the student with J.K. Rowling, a presupposition around Tulsi Gabbard. I forget what it was, but she was making a claim and had no evidence to back it up, and she got trapped in it.
It was the whole Russian.
Hold on, let me turn on your mic.
It was. I remember that video. It was about the whole Russian agent thing, and she was making the whole argument being that Tulsi Gabbard's a Russian agent on Joe Rogan, and Joe's like, I know Tulsi, we're good friends, and she's like, she's an agent, she's a Russian agent. There's the proof. Go look at it. And then Joe's like, what?
Yeah, and then he asked her, and like she can't. He's like, so given that you don't have any proof, do you think that's a good thing to say? And she's like, well, it's known. I don't know how I know it, but it's known, which is exactly what that student said in that first video. Well, a lot of people have said, right. I've heard a lot of people say it, so it must be true. That's all I was trying to say to Michael. That I was like, dude, just because a bunch of people, I'm not lying about this, but your logic is off. And he was probably like, probably not.
That's so disappointing, though, that they didn't release that.
I mean, I went on to have, you can't complain when you get to sit down with Jordan Peterson for 2 hours later, so it panned out.
What was that like, sitting with him?
That's
a guy that you really
I deeply respect. It's like one of those moments, that and Joe Rogan, those are two things I'll never forget. But it's interesting how I feel like sitting down with Jordan Peterson, I feel like that one went way better for some reason. Like Joe just has a different style, and it wasn't Joe at all. It was me. I feel like because with Peterson, there's this thing where he talks about you can feel when your words make you feel weak or strong. So I said, that's how I'm going to go into this. And I promised myself if I ever do get the chance to talk to Jordan Peterson, I'm just going to be like completely honest and he talks about that, just letting the cards fall where they may.
Yes.
And that's the philosophy I took, like no prep really or anything. And I feel like that made for a much better conversation given also the way that he psychologically can guide a conversation. And the premise, the framing of it, there was a better story as well. On Rogan's, most people watching that one are like, who is this guy? And I didn't talk really as much. He opens it up with, yeah, and you got fired. And I just kind of moved on from it, right? And that's what people wanted to hear about.
Yeah.
So then they're like, who is this guy talking about Heath Ledger and making movies and stuff? Because they don't know anything about it. So then it's less interesting.
Here's the thing. You're like, it's funny. We were talking off camera before this, and you're like very self-critical and, watch everything you say. And I appreciate that a lot because you want to put the best foot forward. But people like when they see someone like you who makes very straightforward, very on topic, very niche type videos on one specific thing where you get to demonstrate your power of how you think. They like then learning about how that person got there. If they've seen the videos maybe, and those people seem to enjoy it, but it's like looking at it, and I shouldn't, Joe told me, he's like, don't read the comments, and he's right, but the person who is like, who is this guy? Like, I didn't do a good job of setting the stage or anything to then make that interesting, whereas the whole Peterson conversation, it was around that journey. So, and also with Rogan, there was no lead up with Peterson either, but I just like walked in, we just sat down, and I was like, whoa, and you're on like the biggest podcast in the world. And it's pretty cool though. I'm glad we wouldn't have found you if I mean, maybe eventually we would have, but that's how we got turned on to it. I know a lot of people probably went to your channel.
So you think it went okay?
Yes. Yeah. I listened to like the first hour of it, unless you listened to like all of it, right?
Yeah. It was very good.
You thought it was good?
Yeah, of course. I thought that's what made me interested. I was like, oh, this guy's thinking deeply about things versus reactive responses. I could tell because you take your time when you respond. It reminds me of that Keanu Reeves interview where they asked him a question, he just sat there, and then he answered, or like, don't take this the wrong way, like Kanye with some moments, he's like, I'm going to take my moment. I'm going to take my moment. Wait. And I was like, I like that. I'm like,
that's funny.
This guy actually takes. It would have been better to say 3 years ago, but that's neither.
No, I get what you mean, because that's funny, because I thought I didn't take enough time on that one. Like at Peterson, I did, and that one I was just. But it was a lot of fun, man. It was a great conversation. I just feel like we were just shooting the shit, and most people are like. But it was a lot of fun. It was a moment I will never forget, and I feel like I didn't quite articulate that enough to him, just how much it meant to me either.
I'm sure he got it. I'm sure because he sees what you're talking about, And there's got to be a piece of it from a philosophical standpoint that he's like, that makes sense. That like he listened to me coming up. You know what I mean? Because that is what the allure of him was when he was first coming up. It was just trying to stay strictly with what's the logic of the situation. Remove your emotion. What are the facts here? How can we best find them? And, you know, I think the political spectrum is different now, and I think everyone gets, you know, pushed in different ways. I don't think he's any different with that, but he's certainly a guy that from a deeper thinking perspective I've respected a lot in the past, and I think it's cool when, you know, the new era of that gets to, you know, kind of cross-pollinate with him a little bit.
He's getting so much hate right now, I guess. I don't know how much of that is real or not. Because I looked at the comments like I shouldn't have on, but it was funny. YouTube,
Do you look at your
positive. Sometimes I try to, but you know, I try to. But you're looking at it on Spotify, it was like all negative, and it's almost to the point where it looks like bots. Because I don't get it.
There's with guys like him, I can't give you percentages. I can't sit here and give you the exact evidence of stuff, but there's no doubt that there's some unnatural.
Because how could there be such a discrepancy between YouTube and this other platform?
I think that's a fair question. And I think that's probably, I mean, look at the attacks he's taken for so long. My biggest wish of Jordan Peterson, my biggest criticism of him has been one thing over the past few years: delete your fucking Twitter, because he reads everything and he comes at things like it's human nature. This is another one of those perfect situations of like, be very careful saying, if I were blank, then I would blank. I've never dealt with the kind of shit that he has dealt with now for Christ, like 9-10 years. It's been like a decade, right? So when you get pushed, it's like the physics law of life. For every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. When that reaction is like this, human nature says you're going to punch back like that. And I think that he was so viciously, unfairly attacked, taken out of context, villainized, all these things. And now, while this is all happening, a lot of people were loving him. A lot of people were seeing through that, which I think sometimes we lose sight of, and he might be no different. But it got to a point where, especially from behind the keyboard, where people say, you know, fuck you, die. I think that got to him too much. And there's things in his Twitter that, to me, I'm like, damn.
Like what?
So I'll give you an example. It was actually one that hits close to home. He you know what I'm talking about. The Hoboken hasn't had a traffic death in like, what is it, like 8 years or something like that?
But yeah.
Right. So we got a really good system. This is a great neighborhood here. We got a really good system with the lights. They're all delayed by like 6 or 7 seconds between the walking symbol and I studied this stuff. But, you know, so the AP wrote a story about how what was the title? It was like, Hoboken's traffic laws have prevented no deaths in the last 8 years or something. And Peterson took a screenshot of that title and he said, "This is your woke agenda," or something like that. And I'm just like, Doc, log off. All right, this is a good thing. All right, I don't give a fuck whether it was Republican, Democrat, or, you know, the fucking lemon peel over there that made this. People aren't dying. The roads are pretty safe. Yeah, here it is. "You have become pathetic beyond comprehension at AP, and the woke death will soon visit you." And it's literally, the title is, "A New Jersey city has that limited street parking hasn't had a traffic death in 7 years."
Yeah, man.
You know, like,
I've just been off Twitter.
Good for you.
I don't.
That's
I
what
have
I'm saying.
one.
That's what he should do. Just get off Twitter.
Yeah, I hate seeing the recent stuff with like him and Candace, and I don't know what to make of any of that. It's just.
You don't know what to make of it?
Well, I mean, what do you make of it?
I think it's what I said. I think people, when a finger is thrown in their face over and over again, you and I are capable of this. Everyone listening is capable of this. You can eventually become what they want you to become. There's a human psychology of that. And it's not to say Candace is a little bit of a different story, but it's not to say like he's done that. But are there aspects of him, like when they were trying to say, "You're just a right-wing troll," or something like that 10 years ago? Are there aspects of him where now you can point to it and be like, it might not be your intention. You might be having a bad morning.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see where the people who don't like you can take something out of context and now define you this way? And again, who the fuck am I to say? I never dealt with something like that. And like, I would love to think I would deal with it the best way. I'm also from New Jersey though. And I don't know how much you know people from Jersey, but like we punch back. We punch back twice as hard. I'm no different on that. So it's like, I do try to look at guys like Peterson. I try to look at guys like Rogan, who dealt with ridiculous attacks for 2-3 years there during the pandemic on stuff that he was much more right about than the other side. And it's like, you know, I think he handled a lot of that extremely well. And so I take that as like, oh, there's a lesson from the GOAT. Like, okay, what do you do? Do you log off here? Do you not comment on this thing? It's never going to be perfect, but you know, I can learn from the great things people do. And I also have the benefit when you're coming behind people like this to learn from the things where it's like, ooh, they could have done this better because they had to face it before I may have to face it or you may have to face it.
Yeah. I hate seeing the division and the stuff going on.
Yeah.
With Daily Wire and all that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's like Alessi was saying, like it's almost like independent media became the media there, like from a business perspective.
Yeah, and you saw Jeremy Boring, right? Stepping down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like this, there's these two factions forming. It's just like, I don't know.
What are the two factions in your mind?
In my mind, I mean, I guess you could say it's around Israel, but it seems to be more and more, there's just a lot of people that don't like Daily Wire and I think it was, and I understand it. I stepped in this on Rogan with Brett Cooper. Next thing I know, he's asking me to explain the Cooper situation. I was like, oh God. And then you get flack for that because people are like, why are you talking about drama on Joe Rogan or anything? But it was interesting because it definitely played out into something bigger. And then he had Ian Carroll on. I'm surprised he didn't talk about it at all. But
about the Daily Wire stuff? He's
the one who kind of like broke the whole... but yeah, no, I think this goes to I think it's a really important idea about it's not what you do, but how you do it. So the school that fired me, they could have gotten rid of me easily without it posing whatever threat they view it as. Like there's some, in the same way they could have parted ways with her and relaunched the show. I think there were some mistakes made. I believe them that they didn't like hire an acting coach or anything. And I probably should have clarified that. I hope I didn't piss anyone off when I was talking about that. But.
Yeah, for people that didn't hear the Rogan podcast, can you just briefly give a
Well, he just like, I said,
situation?
I was talking because we were talking about movies and everything. I was saying the Daily Wire is positioned to really do something if Pendragon Cycle lands. Like Game of Thrones, it's a big if, but this recent Brett Cooper stuff is going to probably throw a wrench in that. And it's definitely going to now.
Yeah, but what
and he goes, exactly. That's what he asked me. He's like, what Brett Cooper stuff? And I'm like, oh, Lord. All right. And Jamie, are you familiar with this? And he's like, yeah, I've heard a little bit. So I tried to break it down as basic as like what we actually know. And he's saying, why did she leave? But we don't know. NDAs and everything. Okay, we can kind of think it through and speculate. She's pulling more views than almost, I think she was the second biggest, maybe the biggest at that time. Now that Candace was gone, she probably wasn't, she's like, I'm not getting paid based upon the views. Maybe I'd like to renegotiate. Maybe I want to. She just bought a farm, probably the commute. She was probably just kind of, now we have new evidence though of like indicators, data that shows maybe there was something between her and Jeremy Boring. But so I kind of just like stepped into that trying to explain this thing. And he's like, but I don't get it. I was like, yeah, we don't get it. We don't know what's going on. So I couldn't really answer it adequately. And but I do think, now they're getting flack for like Ian Carroll saying that's what screwed them over, was trying to enter the realm of filmmaking and everything. And that's why Jeremy Boring's gone, they think, and because it's driven them in debt. And it's because it is making a movie. It's one of the worst things you can invest in. It's like nightclubs, restaurants, and movies. It's one of the most difficult ways to make your money back, to make a profit. It's so difficult. His whole point in their philosophy was that the culture, Hollywood has a foothold on the culture. It's like the factory of dreams. It has impacted the culture. So if someone could, and we don't have an alternative to this union model. So it was exciting to me to see someone offering alternative. We have Angel Studios. They were even partnering a bit for distribution with Daily Wire. But they could have done it. They did make mistakes there. And then the story, because this goes to how we view the world through stories. And then there's a villain now. And the story catches momentum and becomes larger and larger. And that's what this is an example of. It just snowballed because of not what they did, but how they did it.
Yeah.
What he came out and said afterwards.
Yeah, I'm not the most like read in guy on that, because like I never really followed Daily Wire content, but I have seen from afar, just over like the Twitter drama, like over the years.
It's a shame.
And that guy was always in the middle of it. Obviously, like the guy Jeremy Boring, he's running the ship or whatever. But it felt like, and Alessio was making this point off camera, it felt like in this case, you know, with respect to calling it independent media, this is a conservative independent media outlet. They're upfront about that, so that's their side. But they were trying to market themselves as like the, you know, the antithesis of the mainstream media, and yet the same exact kind of backroom suit shit seems to be happening there. You know, like pulling the strings like that, and it's kind of sad.
It's big money.
It's big, exactly.
It's gotten big,
Yep.
so it's still alternative in the sense it's not like CNN or one of the, you know, it started as this. Yes, they had seed funding, and yeah, I think there was some. Yeah,
I guess we'll see. Ian's a internet friend of mine, but he's going to be coming on the show.
Oh, cool.
In a couple months. He was all over that one, so I'd like to see like where it's played out to at that point, and see what he says about it. But you know, I just forgetting, you know, the outlets that may lean one way or the other with independent media. It's something I'm really thinking about as being a part of it. You know, you're looking at our fucking operation in air quotes right here. You know, this is like an underdog kind of thing. I love that, but you know, especially as society moves in these pendulums over time, which it always will. You know, you look since World War II, you got Truman, Eisenhower, you know, JFK/Johnson, Nixon /Ford when he gets kicked out, Carter, Reagan. Reagan bought 4 years of HW, Clinton, you know, Bush, Obama, Trump, but like it goes back and forth. So that's just how society runs from one spectrum to the other. So I think in the middle of that, if independent media is going to solve for the sins of mainstream media, we need to be very careful to not fall into those same traps. And that includes the business side, which is what you're pointing out right now with Daily Wire and making it, you know, a bunch of suits saying what content's going to play the best versus like, what are we covering here and what type of truth are we trying to get to, right? And then the other part of it is also bias and not teaming up with any political party or things like that, you know. And unfortunately, where I'll defend people in independent media right now, sometimes it is just how things look rather than how things are, which is a shitty part of our world, but we do got to be cognizant of that, you know. And I'd like to think I am, and hopefully I'll get better at that too. But you know, that's why when I bring people on here, I'm trying to bring people from all spectrums. I stay away from extreme political stuff as much as I can, but you know, it should be like people learn more listening to entertainment, whether it be on my show or other people's shows, but they also are in a position where they can make their own conclusions about stuff. I don't want to sit here and like, what's that fucking term? Was it not? Like, I don't want to be like, oh, he's the thought leader or whatever, like stuff like that. I'm like, no, I'm the independent media covering different shit, talking to different people, shooting the shit. You guys all make your own call. Like in an ideal world, we'll be 10 years from now looking back on it and we'll be like, all right, that's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah, man. You're
Fully
doing a good job.
I'm trying. Well, let's get to your story a little bit, because I did want to hear a little more of that when you were on Joe's show, but you were going into some other stuff that I thought was really good. But were you a teacher right away after school, or how did you get into teaching, and who did you teach without?
Yeah.
You know.
No, I could talk about it and everything. I'll talk about whatever. Yeah, so grad school, I started teaching some classes at Emerson, and I still teach 1 to 2 classes a semester. I developed a class like how to make a living with a camera, and which is essentially what we're doing. You know, it's whether it's narrative or whatnot. Most of the people taking the class now are doing this kind of stuff, and so then I'm like, okay, I need a full-time job because I'm not going to make enough just doing that. And who gets the professor kind of positions? I was like, I'm not going to hold my breath. Like, anyways, So I ended up at a public school, regular average public high school for a year, and then COVID hit, and I was teaching the same thing. And yeah, it was a really cool department because it's kind of like there's the wood shop teacher. I was like the digital vocational, how to make a living with these tools. COVID hits, and because of the teachers union, they cut all first year hires regardless of performance. So that's kind of one of the bones I have to pick with unions, is the fact that it allows things like that to happen rather than how you're doing your performance
Not
metrics or
merit-based.
anything.
Right.
And through, that was a turn of fate. Then I found myself at this school that was still open during COVID, that for behaviorally challenged students, and some students, there's 2 floors, like students upstairs have more physical, serious handicaps or drawbacks, like Down syndrome, whatnot. Downstairs, it might be they were either too much of a bully, too bullied, in a gang, struggle with drugs, whatever. Like, so those students need somewhere to go. So the public schools pay $25,000 a head to send them to this school.
Wow. And what is what age are we? Are we still
Middle
high
school and high school.
Okay. Got it.
Mostly high school though. So the first 3 years I was just working with high school on one site. I grew the multimedia program, then I opened it up to the entire building. So both floors and all the students, and I had my own space, kind of like there's this street, and across the street I had my own space, and it was really cool. And that's how I fell into it.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.